In this video, we'll explore the main elements that make up the Unity 3D editor. Our objectives will be to explore the project, scene, game, and inspector views, understand the differences between game assets, game objects, and components, and play a little bit with the example project. Okay, we're going to continue where we left off with the last video. So we have the standard assets example project open. So over in the projects panel are all the files and folders that make up this project. The files are called game assets in Unity. And as I mentioned, there's a one-to-one relationship in what you see in the project panel and what you see in the file system. So for example, if I just right-click on one of these folders and say Reveal in Finder, and here on the Mac, it'll open up the file system. And you can see I'm in the Assets folder. And within that folder, there's these various subfolders, sample scenes, for example. If I open that, you can see additional subfolders, and then scenes. If I open that, you can see here are scene files with the .unity extension. These map directly to what I'm seeing in Unity. If I back out one level, you can see I'm now in my standard assets example project folder. Within that, it's got various subfolders, including the asset subfolder. If I go back into that, once again, I'm navigating through those assets and folders that we see in the project view. While you can copy new assets directly into the assets folder in the operating system, and they'll be imported into Unity, you should only rename or move files within the projects tab itself of the Unity editor. This will ensure that any connections to the game assets will be maintained within the editor. If you rename or move things directly in the file system, it may break connections and break your project. We'll discuss more about importing assets and organizing the project view later in the course. So let's go ahead and open a scene. Right now we just have a default empty scene here. So I'm going to go ahead and within sample scenes, I've got the scenes folder open, and I'm going to double click on car. And this will open the car scene. So over here is the scene view. The scene view allows you to navigate the 3D world, as well as select and manipulate game objects in the scene. So everything that we see out here are game objects. You could think of the scene view as your visual level editor for the current game scene. So for example, using the mouse, I can left click on things to select them, or I can click and drag to select multiple things. I can right click and then drag to essentially spin around the scene. I can use the scroll wheel to zoom in or zoom out. And then holding different key sequences on the keyboard, I can do additional things. So if I hold the Alt key and then left click, I'm essentially rotating around the view. Holding the Alt key and then pressing the middle mouse button, I'm panning around left, right, up, and down as I move my mouse. And holding the Alt key and right clicking, I'm zooming in, zooming out, or moving in, moving out, much like the scroll wheel. And there's just a whole lot of keyboard shortcuts that you'll learn as you use the Unity editor. So for example, with my mouse over any of these panes, I can hold Shift and then press space, and that will maximize that scene view. In this case, if I do it again, Shift, space, it goes back, it minimizes and goes back to the standard location. So as you use the Unity editor, you'll pick up these keyboard shortcuts. I did include a quick reference sheet PDF that you can use to look these up quickly. Now in the scene view, we have the little gizmo up in the top right corner. This shows our orientation on the game world. You can click on the axes to change your view on the game world. So for right now, I'm in sort of a perspective view. If I click the y-axis, I get a top-down view. If I click this again, I go back to a back view, to a bottom view, back to the top, and then I can rotate around the world and get sort of different set views on the world. Then of course, again, I can hold down Alt and then left click to, once again, modify that view using those mouse operations. And once again, using the left mouse button without holding any keys, I can select game objects out in the scene. So for example, if I click on this little camera icon, I then have selected that game object. And then I can modify things about that game object using, for example, the little gizmo that appears on that. So I can actually drag this arrow up to move the camera up, and you could actually see the results of that in this little camera preview, as well as down in the game view, which we'll talk about in a moment. I can move it down, left and right, and in and out. And there's actually a number of different transform tools available just above the scene view. So we've been using the position tool. There's also a rotation tool, for example, where we can rotate in different directions, left and right, up and down, and so forth. And you can always undo your operations, under Edit, Undo, or you can hit Control Z on Windows or Command Z on the Mac to get things back to the original state. So just below the scene view is the game view. Notice the game view is actually a different view on our game scene than we're seeing in the scene view. If you click down in the game view, you'll notice that you can't actually select things. You can't actually modify the scene from the game view. You can only preview the scene. It's basically showing what the player will see through the active camera in the game. It becomes most useful while actually playing the game. We can play the game by clicking the play button at the top of the screen. So let me go ahead and click play. So now I'm playing. I can drive forward here. I can use the WASD keys to steer, where I'll jump, and navigate around the world, spin out, and so forth. So I'm actually playing this game. And to get out of play mode, I can just tap the play button again. So there's two important modes in Unity. There's edit mode, which is the way we are when we're not playing. This is where we manipulate things in the scene and so forth. And there's play mode. Play is for testing. When we're in play mode, you'll notice that we can actually see things in the scene view, see things moving around, game objects and that sort of thing. But any change that actually happens gets erased as soon as I click play. Everything snaps back to the way it was before I played. So a couple more things on the game view. There's this maximize on play option. If I click that and then hit play, notice the game view takes over the scene, and now I'm sort of in more of a full screen type play mode, which is sometimes nice for playing to really test things out and get the sort of experience like your players might have. But sometimes you'll want to leave maximize on play off so you can actually see the scene view while you're previewing the game. One other nice thing about the game view is you can change the aspect ratio. Right now it's in free aspect, which basically means it will be whatever size I make this window. If I drag it bigger or smaller or whatnot. But if I change the free aspect ratio by clicking on it, I could drop down to something like a 16:9 aspect ratio or a 4:3 aspect ratio. And then it's going to preview the game with that aspect ratio to simulate what it might look like on a display with that given aspect ratio. So we've looked at the project view, which are our game assets. We've looked at the scene view, which is our level that we're building, or our scene, which is composed of game objects. And we've looked at the game view, which is how we preview our game. The next view I want to talk about is the hierarchy view. This is a hierarchical list of game objects that are in the scene. From the hierarchy, you can select game objects, rename them, or delete them, among other things. So for example, let me go ahead and click on the car, and you'll see that there's a direct link between the hierarchy view and the scene view. So when I've got the car selected here, it's also selected out in the world. I'm going to switch back to the position tool, so I see the little gizmos. If I select the camera here, you can see the camera is selected over in the hierarchy. So the hierarchy and the scene view work together. So if, for example, I was off somewhere else in my scene, and then I select the car and hit F, it's going to immediately zoom the scene view to that game object, in this case the car. The other thing to notice in the hierarchy view is that it is a hierarchy. So you can see the car, for example, has this little cascade tab which I can open and close. So the car is a game object, but it's composed of multiple sub-game objects. So if I open it up, you can see all these different child game objects making up the wheels, making up different aspects of the car. So sometimes when you select things in the scene view, it might select one of those sub-objects. So you got to be a little bit careful. If you really wanted to select the car itself, you got to look back at the hierarchy and then make sure that the proper selection was made. So I could then, in this case, click on the car. And then once the car is selected, I could go ahead and reposition it. I could use the rotate to rotate it, for example. I could use the scale tool to scale it up in any number of the axes, Y, X, and Z. And once again, I could undo those things using the Control Z on the Windows or Command Z on the Mac. So that's the hierarchy view. The last view that we haven't looked at is the inspector. The inspector basically shows details of whatever is selected. So right now my car game object is selected, so it's showing details about the car game object. So for example, I can rename it right here at the top. It shows the transform component for the game object, so this shows the position, rotation, and scale of that, and it shows a variety of other components that are attached to that game object. We'll talk a lot more about these components and how they modify game objects as we move forward in the course. So let's go ahead and open a different scene. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the 2D character scene. And Unity is going to notify us that we've made some modifications to the scene. I don't want to save those because I was just demoing things. So let me say don't save. And the 2D character scene will open. So this is an example of a 2D scene. So you can see everything looks the same. We've got of course, the scene view and the hierarchy. So let me click on 2D character and then tap F to zoom to that, and you can see it looks like a 2D character within 3D space. So one thing that we can actually do is in the scene view, we can click on 2D mode. So if I do that, you can see I immediately switch to something that looks more like what we're seeing in the game view. If I zoom out and so forth, now I'm working in a 2D mode rather than a 3D mode. So at any point in time, you can switch your scene between 3D mode, which is showing 3D space with the X, Y, and the Z axis, and 2D mode. You can see the axes go away because we just basically have the Y and the X axis. So this is a 2D game, but the Unity editor really works the same. We have game objects in the scene in the hierarchy. If we select the game objects, we can see the components over in the inspector, as we saw before. We can preview and test the game in the game view. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll hit play to enter play mode, and once again using the WASD keys and I believe the space, I could jump, I could push these little boxes around, and you can see it's a very different type of game than the car game that we were playing before. This shows a little bit of the diversity of the types of games that you can create in Unity. Let me exit play mode, and we can see all the project files or game assets in the project panel. Now that we are starting to become familiar with the Unity 3D editor, in the next lesson we'll discuss how to create and integrate assets into our games.